Good morning from Helsinki. I am, of course, in Esplanade Park, or as it is often called here, Espa. It is in the absolute heart of Helsinki if you've not been here, and it's this huge land that is between North Esplanade and South Esplanade, and it leads right to the sea, leads right to the open air market and the market hall, and where you catch the ferry, the overnight ferry to Stockholm. But the park itself is always a hive of activity. I've had to redo this video a couple times because there was just so much. There were these Chinese tourists who were doing elaborate videos and Instagram photos right near me. I've had to move around a little bit. It's always a hive of activity, obviously because it's in such a central location, but also it's hyper pleasant. And there are just lovely classic cafes, there's theaters, there's other performance space. It's a great meeting spot. There's always crowds going through. I believe they ice skate here in the winter. I think I've seen that, or I might be imagining that. But there are nice sculptures. There's the iconic Havis Amanda sculpture. And also in the very far background, you can see the Russian Orthodox Church, the Uspensky Cathedral. And I wanted to do a little poem from John Berryman, another 20th century American poet. He was very different from Robert Bly. I've done a lot of Bly in this series, and Bly did not like Berryman's poetry. He thought that he was leading in a wrong direction, this confessional poetry. But you can't talk about Berryman without speaking that he had an idiom. He had a distinctive way of composing. It's like if you do the wrong thing enough, maybe in some ways it turns out right or brilliant, or at least to some people. And so, but he wasn't one of the confessional poets that just goes on and on and on about, blowing up little parts of their own life. But he was more in his, and I'm going to read one of the Dream Songs. The Dream Songs was this long series of poems where he's speaking through, and I guess you'd call it a alter ego he called it Henry. And Henry was kind of like the extreme, the overstepper, or it's like those thoughts you get in the middle of the night. Like that's Henry. And he's always catastrophizing things. He's imagining things. He's always in this imaginal space, and he's thinking the worst case scenario, or he's thinking the greatest version of what's kind of like the Don Quixote thing, I guess. But he's often very dark and bleak, and it's a way to talk about our relation to society and what we see around us and what we see within us sometimes, and how we have to push forward in this world. But you have to acknowledge and you have to face all the traumas, the upside down world, the contradictions that you see everywhere. So I think that's what Henry was, and it is confessional, but it's not necessarily, it's not really memoir. At least I hope not. So I've liked John Berryman to a degree. I'm much more into Robert Bly, the spiritual poetry, the connecting everyday observation with the Great Spirit, that kind of thing. But Berryman, I love his language, and just getting into his world sometimes, because it will shake free some parts of you so that you can think and reconfigure things in a more creative way. And so Berryman, I really got to appreciate him through one of my best friends who I met because we worked briefly in the same office for the University of Washington in Seattle. This would have been within a year after I moved to Seattle, I changed careers. I started working in development and fundraising, and we worked for a brief time at the University of Washington. Not on the campus, but we were right downtown Seattle in the Unico building. And one of the frustrating things is that Unico, it actually, they're using the Italian word. It was a commercial real estate company in Seattle, and they thought that they were really distinctive and special, and so they used the Italian word Unico. And I think a lot of people thought it was an acronym for something, and that it was Unico, like UNICO. But I always said Unico, and people would always correct me. But anyway, we were at the 12th floor of the Unico building, working for the University of Washington in development research. Anyway, I'm not going to talk about that. But Elle and I were kindred spirits who had a deep love for literature, poetry, and the quirkiness of life. And sometimes when we were bored or didn't have enough work to do, instead of going for another coffee break, we would listen to poetry in Elle's office. And he had found these recordings of the Dream Songs, and we would just listen to them over and over again. And I don't know if anyone else knew that we were doing this, but and then we'd go for a coffee break, and there was this fantastic place right nearby. I think it was also an Unico-owned building, Torrefazione, which was a small chain of really beautiful, really beautiful cafes, owned by a guy who was from Umbria. I think he was from Perugia. And I was recently thinking about them. I hadn't thought about them for years. They were bought out by Starbucks a long time ago, and they closed down all the Torrefazione, closing down all of the beautiful, distinct things for this bland corporate nonsense. Anyway, that's another topic. But I was thinking about them because around Easter, when I was in Milano, I stayed in Milano for several months. One of my friends is from Umbria, and he had gone home for Easter, of course, to see his mamma and nonna, and he brought back the ciarmicola, the typical Easter sponge cake, kind of from Perugia, and I think they only make it in Umbria. And so he brought that back, and we were enjoying that with our espresso one morning, and then that's what I thought of. I thought of Torrefazione, and then I thought of my time with Elle. We would go to that cafe only 5 times a day while we were working, and then other than that, we were listening to John Berryman poems. But so I'm going to read a little bit from Dream Song 14, which is kind of a fun one. They're all kind of bleak, but they're conversational in some ways, but he always has some element that you have to read a couple times to really get what he's doing. It seems simple, it might seem stupid at first, but then you see that he was a sort of genius. I mean, he's not on Robert Bly's level, of course, but all serious poets are needed in some way, I think. So he says, "Life, friends, is boring. We must not say so. After all, the sky flashes, the great sea yearns. We ourselves flash and yearn. And moreover, my mother told me as a boy repeatingly, ever to confess you're bored means you have no inner resources. I conclude now, I have no inner resources because I am heavy bored. Peoples bore me. Literature bores me, especially great literature. Henry bores me with his plights and gripes, as bad as Achilles, who loves people and valiant art which bores me, and the tranquil hills and gin look like a drag. And sometimes a dog has taken itself, and its tail considerably away, into the mountains or sea or sky, leaving behind me, wag. So that's John Berryman. If you've not read his poetry, I recommend reading the Dream Songs, but I'll give you the ones that are the best. I mean, there is some drivel in there, but then there are absolute treasures within the cycle, and it's this one is it's very, very plain language in some ways, but he always uses words a little bit differently, like when he says "peoples bore me," or when he says, and then the way he talks about Henry bores me with his plights and gripes as bad as Achilles, and he doesn't capitalize Achilles, the Greek god. And then you have the last word, wag. He's talking about this dog. Somehow this dog has taken itself and its tail considerably away in the mountains or sea or sky, leaving behind me, comma, wag. And it's like, at first especially if you've not been exposed to Berryman's lyrics before, it may not make a lot of sense, but what he's saying is, it's actually like really, really bleak. And he's really getting at this alienation idea. He's talking about, this happy dog that is with you and then goes off into the mountains or sea or sky, leaving behind me, wag. And wag is, the dog's gone, but the joy, the happiness, wagging is still there in some way, in some kind of disembodied, other dimensional way, I guess. And it's like you can take just a very, very simple, plain language like that and think about, wait a second, like, what is he doing? Like, where is he pulling his mind? What is he making me think about that I didn't think about before? And how did he order these words where it's like, yeah, sometimes I think life is boring, right? No, it never is once you get into the groove. But I like how it's almost like just standard prose at first, but then he takes you and pulls you along, and then he gives you that beautiful last image of the mountains or the sea or the sky, but you're just left there yourself, me stesso, and then it's like me, wag. I would encourage you to look up the text of this poem and do a better reading than I just did. And delve into a couple other of hymns, like 29 is pretty interesting. I may read that one another day. Anyway, I have to get going. I actually have an appointment coming up. And and then you see the tram in the background. Helsinki has fantastic public transportation, especially the surface trams are great. I mean, the buses, obviously. And then there actually is metro. Though I remember when they launched the metro in the 90s, there was like one line. But there's all kinds of things beneath Helsinki that we don't need to talk about. There are all kinds of things below there that I'm not authorized to talk about, so we won't. But anyway, I hope you have a very pleasant day, and I really have to get going. But just enjoy poetry. That's one of the messages, and come to Helsinki if you've not before. Thank you, and have a great day.